Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Student Affairs Shares. My name is Nikita Haney. I serve as the Director of the Office of Family Engagement, and I am super excited for our guest today. And I'm going to turn it over to them to allow them to introduce themselves.
Hello, folks. My name is Ricky Pulley Jr. I am the Prevention and Response Coordinator in the Sexual Assault Prevention and Education Center here at KU.
Thank you so much, Ricky, for joining me on this episode today. And
Absolutely.
so, first and foremost, can you tell our parents and families a little bit about the Sexual Assault and Prevention Education Center here at the University of Kansas?
Absolutely. We go by the acronym SAPEC. We don't say that whole thing each and every time. It can be a mouthful for sure. But we are the office on campus that is responsible for promoting social change and the elimination of sexual violence through prevention education, inclusive programming, and campus-wide collaboration. We work with partners across campus in a number of ways to address issues around dating violence, sexual violence, and stalking, for instance. But we don't do any advocacy out of our office. Everyone in our office has been an advocate at some point in their professional career, but we don't currently offer advocacy out of our office, but we do any number of educational programming opportunities for students across campus throughout the year.
Thank you so much for that. And that work is super important, particularly when you think about being on a college campus or at a university. Can you highlight what are some of the resources and initiatives that come out of the Sexual Assault and Prevention Education Center?
Yeah, absolutely. So our staff here, we have a staff of five wonderful human beings. We genuinely enjoy working with one another, but we are all responsible for different sort of populations as it relates to sexual violence. We have Jacqueline Carpenter, who is responsible for our universal programming, meaning any programming that is for anyone, regardless as to background, regardless as to knowledge as it relates to sexual violence. Jacqueline will be responsible for. So that includes our major program, Jayhawks Give a Flock, which I'm sure we will talk about today. That also includes things like October, which is Relationship Violence Awareness Month, and April, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and any other sort of tabling. A lot of the front-facing initiatives or programs that we offer as an office would be spearheaded by Jacqueline. Then we have Taylor Jones, who works with our indicated populations. Those are populations who have likely already offended or experienced some sort of sexual violence. And so Taylor does a lot of work with the SFL community, the sorority and fraternity life community, as well as athletics. She does a really cool program called Read the Room that is about going into the actual physical locations of fraternities that have housing here at KU and evaluating those spaces, right? Do we have wayfinding signs? Is this staircase well lit so people can find their way around? Things of the sort. Really unique opportunity that students have really been big on engaging and taking her up on, as well as doing work with the accountability groups that we offer with our collaboration in student conduct, our partners in student conduct. And then we have Kelsey Hunter, who's responsible for our selected populations. Selected populations are those who stand a higher risk to offend or to experience sexual harm. And so Kelsey is primarily responsible for the classes that we teach out of our office, SW 301, Social Welfare 301, which is required for all IFC and Panhellenic fraternity and sorority members. Kelsey heads that class up, as well as another class that we have offered out of our office, Social Welfare 365. And then I primarily responsible for faculty, staff, and graduate assistant education as it relates to those topics. And then our director, Jim Brockman, does a lot of different things, fills in the gaps, honestly, but a lot of experience in effective servant leadership and creating healthy workplace environments. Doing a lot of trainings around those as well. So that's a little bit about what our office offers and the ways in which we engage this work.
Thank you so much, Ricky. Again, we know that this work is really important. We know that this work can be sensitive to talk about and discuss. It's not necessarily things that you would want to happen, but there is so much value in preparing and having our students be knowledgeable and educated on the respective issues and challenges that might occur here at the university. And so with that, we're going to get into some of our Q&A questions. So we'll shift gears to that. And I'm sure our parents are eager for you to answer some of these questions. And so first and foremost, what are common misconceptions that parents have about sexual assault on a college campus?
Yeah. So I think if I'm just reflecting on my own experiences and what I was taught by parents, but also what I've been able to hear from students and parents since working in higher ed, right? Stranger danger is the first one that comes to mind, right? Got to watch out. We prepare our students. We give them pepper spray. We give them tasers. We give them whistles or now birdie alarms, all those things. And not to say that those things are not beneficial or they can't be helpful, right? But what we know is that 84% of college sexual assaults are perpetrated by someone who is either a acquaintance or a non-stranger to the survivor, right? And so more often than not, it's happening at the hands of someone that the survivor knows, right? So not saying that we shouldn't be aware of our surroundings, not saying that we shouldn't look out for the creepy person driving the van with the trench coat, but what we know to be factually true is that most of the assaults are happening at the hands of someone that the survivor knows. Similarly, there's a lot of, I think, well-intentioned emphasis put on, protecting our drinks when we go out, things of the sort, right? So that nobody slips anything in our drinks. And the reality is that we know vast majority of assaults that are perpetrated by substance or facilitated with a substance, that substance is alcohol itself, right? Because it is so easily accessible on a college campus in a college town. You don't have to, it doesn't look out of place if you have it, right? No one's questioning why does someone have a beer or a drink, right? And so, again, there's not as high of a rate, or it is not as common that we see people slipping something in someone's drink as much as someone may just be feeding someone more and more drinks, right? Again, alcohol doesn't cause sexual assault, but someone may use alcohol to facilitate some sort of sexual assault. And 68% of sexual violence, 68% of people who perpetrate sexual violence will perpetrate it more than one time, right? And so those ideas that, oh, this is, a rare occurrence, like, people don't typically do that, that is not necessarily true. I've heard things about false reporting. What we know to be factually true is that 92 to 98% of reports are actually true. Um, you know, it's not about sex, right? So many people will think about sexual violence as being about sex. It is about power and control. Sex is the vehicle, but power and control is the gas that drives that vehicle, right? And if you have a car, you know that your car doesn't go anywhere if you don't fill it up with gas. I had to do that this morning, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to make it work, right? And so those sorts of things. But I think really the I won't say the biggest ones, but the ones that I think sort of resonate the most with me. There's no perfect victim, right? Like it doesn't matter what someone was wearing, where they were, how much they had to drink. Sexual assault is never the fault of the person who has experienced it, but there's also no perfect, like everything doesn't have to be aligned for us to recognize that someone has experienced sexual violence. But beyond that, right? Victim blaming statements are not particularly helpful in the same ways of the ideas of who's allowed to be a victim are not particularly helpful, right? It can happen to anybody regardless of any identities or orientations that they may hold. And then the last couple ones are there's no correct way for someone to respond in the moment that they are experiencing the harm, right? We know about fight and flight, right? But there's also freeze responses where people experience, a tonic immobility, that they just sort of freeze and they're not able to respond in any way. And then we know that there's also a fawn response where people may seemingly appease the person who is causing the harm to try to prevent any further harm from happening. So there's no correct way to respond in the moment. And similarly, there's no correct way to heal after the moment. Healing is not linear. If you've ever experienced a breakup, I think about myself, right? I thought I was over a breakup one time. I saw a butterfly and it immediately took me to a Mariah Carey song. And I was like, I'm clearly not over this breakup the way I thought I was, right? Healing's not linear. It's not just happening from point A to point B, right? We may take a couple steps forward and take a couple steps back and figure that whole thing out. And it can look messy and confusing, but that is why you have resources, and we'll talk about some of those resources later on campus, as well as what people can do to support those people in their lives. But again, Main things I would say, stranger danger, perfect victims, drugs being dropped in drinks are not as common as we like to make them seem.
Thank you so much for that robust response. A lot of good knowledge and things to consider when thinking about the nuances of sexual violence and uh, sexual harm on a college campus. So, which brings me to my next question. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but if there are any additional things you would like to add, I'm sure our parents would love to hear that. So, you talked a little bit about power dynamics, right? And
Mhm.
so we know that that can be very nuanced, right? Particularly when we think about college campuses and students having access to, maybe things that they weren't didn't have access to prior to them coming and transitioning
Mhm.
into college. So how would you say alcohol, social settings, and power dynamics factor into campus sexual violence?
Yeah, absolutely. So alcohol is readily available on college campuses far and wide. It's the reality is that it's just not hard to access, regardless as age or anything. It's just not a difficult thing to access in college towns or on college campuses. And so it is also a thing that, again, because it is so easily accessible and because it is the culture of many colleges and universities across this country, it doesn't look out of place if someone is using alcohol to facilitate some sort of harm, right? We're just having a good time. We're just getting drinks. We're just passing our buddies drinks. It's no fun if everybody's not having some, right? So like it becomes commonplace that the expectation for our students is to engage in substances of some sort, particularly alcohol. And that is not to say that, I'm not telling students what to do or not to do, but it is it is not uncommon on college campuses that sexual assaults are facilitated by alcohol primarily. And so when we think about alcohol and we think about existing in our peer groups and power dynamics, it can be really difficult, right? Particularly, we're just getting to know these people. We don't know what our threshold is for maybe alcohol consumption, what their threshold is for alcohol consumption, right? And then we bring into this whole thing like these group dynamics and these power differentials, right? And so maybe the person who is causing us harm has a lot of social capital built up in the organization or on campus in general. And so it may make it more difficult for us to speak up against them or to speak up in the aftermath of the violence that has been perpetrated. In the same ways, people may use those positions of power, that social capital that they built, having a good name, a good reputation, seemingly to perpetrate the harm or to go undetected after perpetrating the harm. And so it's a really complex place to be. It's a complex understanding, and we talk about this in a number of our programmings, but also in our class. And so, again, not trying to scare anyone or shame anyone, but understanding that there are a lot of things happening at once for students, particularly our new students, right? Like you've never been this far away from home for this long and had this much access to this many things. And so it's so new in so many ways. And so it can absolutely play a role. This is not in a victim blaming way, but we want to make sure that we are being as intentional as possible about our consumption and being really intentional about our communication, both prior to consuming any sort of substances, but particularly while we are consuming any sort of substances. We want to be really, really intentional that we are erring on the side of caution and respecting folks' humanity and understanding that even if this is a thing that we might want to engage in, we would rather have that experience where the person is fully engaged and able to consent to it than to have to worry about that we violated someone's boundaries.
Yes, and boundaries are so important, right? Especially when you get to you transition into college and you are making these different connections and you are building these relationships. And so, what does healthy communication and mutual respect look like as our students are on this campus and they are building these connections and these relationships?
Yeah, I love that. So regardless as to the nature of the relationship, whether it is platonic, whether it is romantic, whether it is sexual, whether it is familial, like it doesn't matter what the relationship is. Some key tenets of a healthy relationship or healthy communication tactics or strategies, right? People are able to make decisions together. It's not always one person making the decision for both people or for the entire group. That there's an open space to discuss any number of issues that may be impacting us personally, financially, spiritually, like there's space for us to discuss the things. And even if we can't necessarily fix them, we can help or offer up resources to the folks who are trusting us with this information. But then, particularly in the way of romantic relationships, right? We love to have time together. We enjoy being around each other, but we can also be okay not being around each other, right? We're independent human beings who enjoy the experience with another person, but we're not needing of that other person for our existence. And so, but I think that those are tactics again, regardless of the relationship or the nature of the relationship, that we should be practicing. We should be making decisions together collaboratively with our friends, right? We should be considering the feelings of other. I've heard it all my life that the highest form of love is consideration, right? If you care about me truly, you will consider how I feel in this moment. And so we're not pressuring people into doing things that they don't want to do. We're not attempting to convince someone to turn their no into a yes. We're respecting it because we respect that person. And then creating a space where we can have those tough conversations or be vulnerable with one another.
Yes, and vulnerability is so important. I have been an instructor for the SW301 class for quite some time now. And so I know we talk a lot about that in the class, not vulnerability necessarily, however, but what it means to practice that, particularly when we think about consent.
Mhm.
And so I would love for you to maybe speak to how can families reinforce that consent is ongoing and can be withdrawn at any time. And then I know we have our come standard here at the university through SAPEC. If you would like to speak a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the easiest, or maybe not easiest, but one of the easier ways for families to reinforce the ideas that consent is ongoing and that it is. So let's actually backtrack. Our come standard says the way that we define consent here at the University of Kansas, as Nikita said, through SAPEC, is that consent is C, meaning that it is continual, right? So it's happening. That's not right. Where did I get continual from? Excuse me, consent is communicated, that we clearly communicate the way that we are engaging in this. We want to engage in a particular act, right? So we're not simply relying on body language or relying on someone not saying no, right? We want people to actively say yes. So we're communicating primarily with our words that we want to engage in whatever the activity is. And it doesn't have to be sexual, right? It can be any activity. It is ongoing, right? Meaning that it is happening from event to event. Just because I consent to something on Monday does not mean that I want it on Tuesday, right? I think of it in the way of like food. Just because I had a burger on Monday doesn't mean I want the burger on Tuesday. Or just because I ordered pizza on Friday doesn't mean my pizza man gets to show back up on Saturday at my door with another pizza, right? Like that's not how that works. It's ongoing. It is continually happening from event to event. Consent to one thing is not consent to all things. It is mutual. Everyone who is engaged in whatever is happening has to have a say and has to consent to what is happening. If not, it is not mutual. And so it is not a one-way street. It is a two-way street. It is a four-lane highway. It is whatever the case may be for whatever the activity is. And then it is enthusiastic. I don't know about you, Nikita, but have you ever asked someone to like do a favor for you and they did like the begrudging, like, I guess so. And you were like, you know what? Keep it. I don't even want it. I'll figure something else out, right? Same sort of thing here. If we are engaging people in any sort of way and they are begrudgingly going along with it, that's not what we want. We think that consent is a pretty low bar overall. That is a starting point. We want people to have enjoyable experiences, whether they are sexual in nature or not. And so we want people to be enthusiastic in their engagement, not necessarily jumping up and down, touching their toes, but we don't want people to feel like they are forced or pressured to agree to do anything with us. And so in that vein, I think things that parents can practice at home, not forcing your kids to hug family members if they don't want to hug family members, right? Or touch people, right? Like respecting their bodily autonomy before they get to college sends the message to your children that this is the expectation, even when they are away from home, right? That we respect their decisions. I am not telling people how to necessarily parent their children. I am not telling you what gets to fly in your house per se, right? But we want to make sure that we are engaging our students prior to getting to campus so that we're empowering them to know that they have the options to say yes and no when they are here because they've had the options to say yes and no about particular things as it relates to their home life. And so it starts again outside of sex. I think consent is just another word for permission. And so when we remove it from a sexual context, there are so many instances where we get to practice consent in our day-to-day lives. We practice asking your student before you take something. I know you bought it. It's yours. I get it. These are all things my mama told me. And right, it reemphasizes the idea that people have to ask, right, or that they should ask before they take something from somebody else or borrow something from somebody else. So little ways like that we are just constantly checking in and making sure that people are okay with what is happening before they even get to college. So we're building that muscle. So it's second nature by the time they get here.
Thank you so much for that, Ricky. Again, super powerful in making it a daily practice to ask permission regardless, right? And knowing that it just does not exist in the confines of whatever the type of relationship it is, but particularly even if it's not a sexual relationship. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for that. So switching gears, but staying in the same lane, we know that sexual violence again can be high on college campuses. And so if a student were to have that experience, um, what advice or insight can you give to our parents and families about if their student were to disclose an
Mhm.
experience of sexual harm? So, um, what would be deemed as a supportive response, and then what is some language or things to avoid after that disclosure has taken place?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So I think nearly every presentation that we or training that we offer out of this office, we talk about this towards the end around how to respond if someone discloses to you. And so three short and simple points that I think people can hold and chew, even if they are a little bit difficult at times. So the first one is to simply believe them. Right? If someone comes to you, particularly your student comes to you and tells you that they have experienced this sort of harm, believe them. I am not a parent, so I won't speak to what it would feel like as a parent to have to hear that information. But we're not asking you to be judge and jury. We're not asking you to be a detective. We're not asking you to be a prosecutor. Even if those are roles that you hold outside of this respective um, instance, right? Believe them. What we know to be true is that when they experience a positive response from disclosing, they're more likely to seek out resources to aid them in their healing and less likely to experience the negative psychological impacts of the violence that they experience. And the inverse is also true. If people get a negative response when they disclose, they are more likely to experience those negative psychological impacts and less likely to seek out resources to aid them in their healing. What we say in those first moments when someone discloses to us makes a world of difference. And so simply believing them, we don't lose anything by believing people when they come to us. I use the example of going to the doctor. And if you went to the doctor and said, "Hey, doc, my head's been hurting," and the doctor looked at you and said, "But really, is it? Are you sure?" That would be a really bad experience, right? Like to have someone discredit what you are telling them you are experiencing. So simply believe them. The second one is to remind them that it's not their fault. Nothing that anybody does, nowhere that anyone goes, no amount that anyone drinks causes them to be sexually assaulted. Sexual assault is not on the person who has experienced the harm, or sexual violence is not on the person who has experienced the harm. It is on the person or the people who have decided to perpetrate said harm, right? And so it is very common that survivors will internalize and believe that they did something wrong to lead to the violence that has been perpetrated against them. That is not the case. I talk in my class about natural consequences. The natural consequence to drinking too much is to be hugged up to a toilet saying, "Lord, if you get me through this, I'll never do it again, only to be back next week," right? The natural consequence to drinking too much is not to experience sexual violence. And so we have to be really intentional about making sure that we are letting survivors know that it is not their fault. And then lastly, asking them what will be helpful for them. And I think this one may be the one that is most difficult for parents, right? To ask their students, to ask their children what would be helpful for them because we want to help them. We want to remove that burden or that pain from them, right? But what works for you as a parent or guardian may not work for your child for whatever reason, right? It may not be their general disposition. It may not like any number of things. and that's okay. We want to make sure that what we are offering up is going to be helpful for the person who has experienced the harm. Telling them what we would do in this instance, not particularly helpful, right? Because we're not the one in this instance. And so we want to make sure that we're allowing them to restore their own voice and their own power and control by picking what feels right and fair for them and being supportive of that. Some things I would say not to do, right? Even as a parent, don't overpromise, right? You are but one person, even though you are their parent or guardian. You may not be able to solve this. You may not be able to take this pain away or the hurt away, right? Like, and so don't overpromise what it, but you can promise that you will be there for them and that you will be a space that allows them to, disclose as they feel comfortable. And in that same vein, don't pressure them into sharing more than they want to share, right? I know that we want to get as many details as possible so that we can attempt to get to the bottom of this and have it, adjudicated in whatever way and allow them to share as they feel comfortable. Keep those proverbial doors open so that they feel comfortable sharing as it works with their own nervous system. And then, controlling your own emotions, right? If your students come to you and tell you that they've experienced this, you yelling and screaming on the phone is not particularly beneficial for them in that moment, right? So controlling your own emotions, even as difficult as that may be, and it may mean like you have to take a time out, right? Or you may have to, sort of remove yourself from the process and bring in a resource of some sort. That's okay, right? But we don't want to heighten those emotions that our students may already be facing. And then I would say, lastly, Nikita, separating any anger that you might feel from your student having maybe broken a rule or a standard that you set for them prior to them getting to college that you may feel played a role in this. So I'll example, right? Maybe you feel as though your student shouldn't have been drinking or drinking as much as they did, right? And you're upset that they drank as much as they did. And so they weren't, they weren't, they didn't have the capacity to consent or the full, activity of their body, right? That is a fair feeling to feel. And that is still not an excuse for what they experience. And so we want to make sure that we're not putting it on them. They've already experienced the harm. We don't want to load onto that by giving our anger about them having broken a rule or something that we set or a standard that we had set as a family group or anything of the sort that we may believe had played a role in their in the violence perpetrated against them. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Very powerful response. And I'm sure our parents are appreciative of that. And so you talked about resources, and we said
Mhm.
we were going to get into some of those. And so, can you talk a little bit about what are the options on campus for if a student was to have an experience of sexual violence? So, maybe talking about what are some of the reporting options, right?
Mhm.
What are some of those confidential versus our non-confidential resources?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I will say mandated reporters, nearly everyone who gets a check from the University of Kansas is a mandated reporter. That includes faculty, staff, as well as undergraduate faculty and staff. Excuse me, undergraduate staff, undergraduate and graduate staff, not faculty. Excuse me. There are confidential employees on campus, and that includes the folks in our care services office, our the clinical or the clinicians in CAPS, which is the counseling and psychological services, as well as the medical providers in Watkins. All of those folks are located in Watkins Health Center. Another confidential support system for students is the Student Case Management and Support Office as well. So those places are confidential. And when I say confidential, that means that those offices, the people who work in those respective spaces do not have an obligation to report instances of harassment, sexual violence, and discrimination to the Office of Civil Rights and Title IX, right? You can go and talk to those people, and what you say there stays with those folks. The folks in care, CAPS, and the Watkins are all located in Watkins Health Center, if I didn't say that earlier. But again, confidential means that they do not have an obligation to report to Civil Rights and Title IX. Nearly everybody else on campus has a responsibility to report those instances to Civil Rights and Title IX. So reporting options, technically speaking, the two reporting options on campus are KUPD and the Office of Civil Rights and Title IX. But someone may decide they want to go the confidential route and then decide later that they would rather, report it. That's also okay. There's no necessarily one right way or wrong way to do it. But there are only a select few confidential employees on campus. And so what you will come across is that most folks will disclose that they are mandated reporters. So, hey, if you share with me, then I have an obligation to share this with the Office of Civil Rights in Title IX. But there are a healthy number of confidential resources on campus for students that can help them to process and decide if they want to go the reporting route or not, as well as some community options that exist for students as well.
Thank you so much for that, Ricky. And so all of this information is very important, right? And we know that it's also important as we continue to get our new classes as they come in as freshmen. And then, once they matriculate through their trajectory here, we know that bystander intervention is very important, right? And so, what would you say is the role of bystander intervention and peer accountability in reducing that harm? And then, what are some of the initiatives or programs that SAPEC is currently doing to assist in that education on peer accountability and bystander intervention?
Yeah, I love that question so much, Nikita. What we know is that the research suggests that those who use sexual violence in college are oftentimes influenced by their peers, right? We have been taught to maybe think of people who perpetrate sexual violence as these, monsters, and not typically. It's typically the person that we know that is beside us, right? And we're influenced by our peers. The inverse is also true, right? So peer pressure doesn't have to be bad. It can be good, right? I am currently experiencing good peer pressure where my friends are earning doctoral degrees, and now I'm like, I got to go get one too, right? And so same thing is true when we are intentional about setting standards for our friend groups, for the people that we are hanging out with, right? In our respective student organizations, we are setting the temperature for what it is that we will and will not allow. Accountability is such an interesting or a fascinating thing to me because accountability is an invitation. We can't force people to be accountable for their things, right? But we can invite them to accountability, but it only happens when we're in community with people. And so it's easier to call someone in opposed to calling someone out, right? Calling in means like, hey, I'm not making a big spectacle of this, but I do want to address something that I saw that doesn't mesh well with who I am or what we want our friend group to be, right? Like whatever the behavior is that we're talking about was unbecoming for whatever reason it may have been, right? Calling people in allows us the opportunity to share our grievances about what has happened in a way that lets them know that we care about them and we're doing this because we care about them. If we weren't talking about it, then they should be concerned, kind of thing, right? And so, one of the really unique things, and I light up when I get to talk about this. One of the really unique programs that we offer out of this office is Jayhawks Give a Flock. Jayhawks Give a Flock is bystander intervention, active bystander intervention training for all incoming freshmen prior to the beginning of classes starting. So it happens over the course of 2 weekends before classes start, one weekend for Panhellenic sorority members, and then the second weekend for the rest of the freshman student body population. And so over the course of 2 weekends, we educate, and Nikita, you've helped us out over the years, right? We educate close to 5,000, give or take, students every year over the course of 2 weekends on what it means to be an active bystander. How do we go about being an active bystander? We talk about the 4 Ds of bystander intervention, to directly intervene, to distract, to delegate, and to document. We talk about what barriers exist for people intervening in ways. Why is it that sometimes people don't intervene when they see something happening, right? We cover all of that. It is a really unique program. It is the largest bystander intervention training of its kind in the entire country. Pretty sure it is the largest of its kind in the world, but I don't have all of the facts to back that up. But we like to say in the galaxy because we're just doing great things here at KU, right? And we believe in the work that we're doing and the our campus partners that help us carry that out. And so, actually, as of this year, we are, I think, at 99% of undergraduate students on the Lawrence campus being trained in how to be active bystanders, right? And we have done some longitudinal studies around the effectiveness of that and whether or not people are actually practicing those things. And what tentatively, from the research, what we are seeing is that students feel empowered to practice those things. They trust that the people that they see as they move about campus have also been trained in how to do active bystander intervention. And so they feel empowered to do it in a communal way, in collaboration with their peers. And so I think that's a really, really cool thing. And then to follow that up, we offer a program called Barstander or Boostander. It is sort of like an escape room where faculty and staff are the actors. Portraying different incidences that may happen at a party or a bar, and students have an opportunity to put those bystander intervention skills to use to disrupt the violence from happening in that space. And then we award those students with some prizes or some things to go out and be members of the community, because we want people in the community who are going to say something when they see something, sort of thing. And so, yeah, we really love bystander intervention. It is ground zero for us, for students here at KU, and the ways in which we want to display that we are members of this community. We do it because, not just because it is legally the right thing. We do it because we care for one another, and we are serious about our commitment to KU and to our fellow Jayhawks, and making sure that this is a place where we all get to exist free of violence.
And that's all that we can ask for, right? Making those learning opportunities possible for our students, making it possible also for professional staff that also work here in faculty, and even our parents and families.
Yeah.
Which leads me into my last question. How can families reinforce prevention education here on our campus, right? From the beginning to the end, what would be your advice for parents to continue helping us make learning possible in that prevention education?
Yeah, I think again, it prevention starts at a place of not it's not a matter of starting at here's what you do to not experience violence. Prevention is a matter of here's what you do to not perpetrate violence against other people, right? And so we go back to that conversation around consent, right? How do we, if you're engaging consent outside of sex with your students and your children, you're already building that muscle, right? You're already reinforcing that before they've ever stepped foot here. But reinforcing that as they move throughout their college experience, reminding them that they don't have to consent to anything that they don't want to consent to, that, it should be enthusiastic, all of those things, right? But also those points that we talked about in regards to healthy relationships, keeping that space open for your students to be able to talk to you and feel as though it is a safe space that they can land if they need to talk to you. One of the other pieces I'd love to talk about, Nikita, is being mindful of what we're saying, even if we don't know whether or not violence has occurred or not, right? So we see something on TV with celebrities, being mindful of what we say on social media, being mindful of what we say in conversation, because the people around us hear that, and it informs whether or not they feel safe enough to talk to us about what they may have experienced, right? And so again, I think it is just building that muscle in small, seemingly small ways, right? I'm not asking any parents to pick up another degree and attempt to be a primary educator around these things, but we can practice all of these things in just our daily interactions with one another. And so treating your students as though they are young adults who are learning about themselves and the world at large and making decisions, and allowing them the space to make mistakes and understand that the world is not over if they make a mistake, right? But also holding them accountable. I think all of those things reinforce what it is that we want to encourage through prevention education. And I don't think it hurts to challenge our students to a higher standard, right? To hold them to a higher standard that, hey, you're going to KU, that's a special place, and you're a special person. And so you should operate in a special sort of way that is in consideration for the well-being of those around you. So again, I think it ultimately sums up being a decent human being is how we reinforce what we are trying to get at with prevention education. And I believe our parents do a great job. And I think that, we can all stand to be better, our office included, right? We are constantly learning about what works, what doesn't work. And so just staying attuned and connecting with our office and figuring out what works and what doesn't work, and maybe reaching out, all those sorts of things. Don't be a stranger is what I'm getting at, right? I want our parents to feel like they are empowered to reach out to get advice and information so they can support their students as well.
What a phenomenal segue. Thank you so much, Ricky, for all of that knowledge and education and really answering those questions in a robust way for our parents and families and supporters of our Jayhawks here at the University of Kansas. And so, speaking of parents being able to get SAPEC's information, can you share one where parents can stay connected with SAPEC? And then
Mhm.
also, if there are any upcoming initiatives or events that parents can encourage their students to get involved in with SAPEC.
Absolutely. So for starters, you can follow us on social media. Instagram is our primary platform on social media that we engage. And so we are KU underscore SAPEC. So just KU underscore SAPEC. You can find us on there. We are constantly posting about programming, but also posting about just different educational points, talking points as it relates to the school year. So we have some posts on there about spring break, and we have posts on there at the start of school, right? And so that's a great way to stay connected to our office and what it is that we are offering, as well as our website through ku.edu. So encourage parents to get connected in those ways. But of course, you will see us at orientation. I encourage parents to come speak to us. We won't bite, promise. We have some pretty cool things that we give to students and parents in the way of swag items that are pretty popular, particular our peach sticker. And I won't spoil the surprise. I'll let that be a surprise for you when you get here. But come see us, right? Talk to us. We want to hear your concerns. We want to hear all that stuff. Not that we can necessarily dispel everything or quell everything, but we want to be able to sit in it with you and let you leave assured that there are resources here for students. And so, yeah, when you see us, come speak to us. April is mere moments away. And so April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And so we have programming happening for the entire month of April around supporting survivors, around oh goodness, prevention, like primary prevention. We have any number of programs. There's a robust list of programs that we are offering up this year for SAAM, as well as offering up our we'll be tabling every day in front of Watson Library as we do every year, passing out free I Heart Consent or Jayhawks Heart Consent t-shirts. And so there are any number of opportunities to connect to our office when students get on campus. We are constantly tabling around campus. Offering volunteer opportunities. We have student employment opportunities pretty regularly for students as well. And so there are plenty of ways to connect to our office. But again, April is SAM, and then August is Jayhawks Give a Flock for those incoming freshmen. And so be prepared. We encourage students to challenge themselves. And so I encourage them before they ever step foot on KU's campus, go ahead and start challenging yourself now, right? Challenge yourself to think in ways you hadn't thought before. Challenge yourself to engage information maybe you hadn't heard before. If you're a person who typically talks a lot, maybe you start challenging yourself to sit back and be a more active and intentional listener. If you're a person who's more quiet, maybe you're challenging yourself to speak up a little bit more. We can't wait to see folks when they get here in August or even prior to August during orientation. Love to have students and be able to interact and exchange that information between our staff as well as the students. And so, yeah, plenty of opportunities to connect to our office throughout the year. Big months are October and April as well as August. But look forward to seeing folks as they get here and they start their journeys as the new Jayhawks.
Well, Ricky, thank you so much for being on this episode of Student Affairs Shares. I appreciate
Absolutely.
your time this afternoon. And I know that our parents, families, and supporters of our Jayhawks will appreciate this information. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.
I appreciate you, Nikita, and rock chalk.